Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Subsidence Forum webinar. I'll just give it a bit more time and let some more people join because obviously we have just hit the hour. So I'll be back with you shortly. So good morning, everybody. Just going to give it one more minute, give people a chance to join this morning. There are a lot joining, which is great. So I'll be back with you in a few seconds. So as I say, good morning, everybody. We'll make a start. Really lovely attendance this morning with over 200 people joining. So really good for the Subsidence Forum. As I say, welcome to the first in a series of webinars held by the Subsidence Forum. I'm Lauren Fairley, I'm the secretary of the forum and will act as host this morning as well, which is very exciting. So I hope I do a good job for you all. There will be a questions and answers section after the mock courtroom, so please feel free to submit any questions. I'll very quickly go over to the housekeeping bits. There is a chat facility at the bottom of your screen. Please do use that. It will be monitored throughout. So any questions that you have to the panel, please do submit them at any time. I will read them out after the court case, as I say. There is also a questions and answers section as well. So if you'd rather use that facility, please do use that. Just a quick mention on the chat facility, if you want to put in the toolbar, you can either do it to all panelists or all panelists and attendees on that drop down. So please just be mindful of that. All questions will be anonymised as well, so your names won't be read out as the questions are. We will have a poll section as well after the case, keeping it a little bit light and asking you all to act as the judge of the case. So there will be some polls afterwards. It will be fairly self-explanatory after that. Once the poll is actually launched, there will be the facility to vote on what option you want. So obviously we'll give it a bit of time, and then those answers will come in. Finally, can I just make you guys aware, obviously everybody's internet speed is different. It is a pre-recorded video, so there may be some lag and there may be some out of sync as well. Don't worry too much about this, but if you do have big technical issues, if you can't hear the sound or whatever, please do pop it on the chat, and one of us will get back to you on it and try and resolve the situation. So that's me complete with the housekeeping bits. I will see you after the case for the questions and answers section, but I will now pass you to Ron Mace, who is the chair of the forum. Ron, over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Good morning and welcome to the Subs Forum 2020 training event. My name is Ron Mason. I'm the current chair of the Subs Forum. I'm joined today by Patrick Isaacs, who is the head of the Training and Education Group, and Sarah Dodd, the vice chair. Both Patrick and Sarah will discuss shortly the format of today's event and those that follow over the next 2 weeks, plus how we in the subsidence industry are trying to adapt to the current environment that we seem to find ourselves in. Before I hand over to Patrick, I thought it would be good just to remind everyone, both current members and those joining us for the first time, of some of the objectives that the Forum is trying to achieve and push forward. These are improve public awareness of substance issues, promote the substance industry, improve lines of communication between all parties involved in subsidence, improve quality and standards throughout the industry, and finally, establish a centre of shared knowledge and exchange of non-competitive information. Today's and following events certainly tick the box for the last item. And if after these webinars you feel that either you or your company could assist us in achieving these objectives, then we would love to hear from you. And please try and contact us in the future. I now hand over to Patrick Isaacs. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ron. And can I just say that is one of the best home office backgrounds that I've seen in a long time. So well done. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining in. I see we've got over 200 people registered today, which is fantastic. So thank you for your support. As Ron says, my name is Patrick Isaacs, and I head up the Training and Education Special Interest Group within the Forum. And my main task is to arrange the annual training day, which is the highlight of the Forum's calendar. We get a day out of the office, a chance to meet some old friends, have a bit of a gossip, and learn about all things new in the subsidence world. Historically, these events were held at the BRE Centre in Watford, although over the last couple of years, we've got a little bit more adventurous and started taking the delegates out to a muddy field up in Hertfordshire somewhere, where our member companies would demonstrate their skills in a live environment, replicating what they do on a day-to-day basis on actual subsidence cases. So over the last couple of years, we've had demonstrations of site investigations, level monitoring, crack monitoring, arboricultural surveys, piling techniques, ground improvement techniques, to name but a few. These demonstration days have proved a great success. In fact, last year's was the highest attendance we've ever had at a training day. So obviously the Forum were keen to do something bigger and better this year. And I'd like to think that that's what we've achieved with a little help from modern technology. So instead of playing around a field in the rain, and it is raining today, this year we're having a virtual training day, which you can enjoy from the comfort of your home office. The virtual day will be split into 3 separate webinars, today, next Friday, and the Friday after that, all from 9 till 10. And we hope you'll be able to log on to all 3, but you can pick and choose if time is tight. We do intend to record all the webinars, which will be published on the Forum's website in due course. So if you do miss one, then you'll be able to view it there in a few weeks' time. Just one quick point on the registration. Just because you've registered today doesn't automatically mean that you're registered for the next 2. Each event has to be registered for separately. So if you haven't done that yet, then I'd urge you to do it now, or perhaps wait until the webinar's finished, actually. So how are these webinars going to work? Shortly, I'm going to hand over to Sarah Dodd of Beechcrofts, who, as Ron mentioned, is the vice chair of the Forum and will become the chair in May next year when Ron steps down after his 2 years in the hot seat. Sarah is hosting the first of the demonstrations, which is a mock-up of a tree root nuisance case. And as some of you may know, tree-related clay shrinkage subsidence accounts for approximately 60% of all valid subsidence cases. So it's a large chunk of our work, and it will be good to hear about some of the legal principles behind that subject. Sarah's video will last 30-35 minutes, so there'll be time for some question and answers at the end. And as Lauren says, if you have got any questions, please submit them via the chat function, and we'll present them to Sarah and the other panelists at the end of the video. and we aim to be finished by 10 o'clock. Next Friday, we're going to have 2 demonstrations, each lasting 15 to 20 minutes. First up will be Optera. They're a specialist contractor, and they'll be showing us some complex subsidence repairs that they've been involved with, such as root barrier installations and retaining wall reinstatements. They'll be followed by GeoBear. Some of you may remember them from last year, and they'll be explaining what's new with ground injection techniques and how the techniques are evolving and can now be used on clay soils to resolve clay shrinkage cases. Again, there'll be time for some question and answers, so you can quiz the panelists on what you've seen in the videos. The final webinar is going to be on the 16th, again 9 o'clock, and another 2 demonstrators. First up will be Shire Structures, and they'll show us how they undertake site investigations on subsidence damaged properties, how the soils are recovered, how they're logged and how they're described, and eventually find their way onto the reports that we all see. Then the final demonstrator will be Helifix, and they'll be showing us some typical masonry reinforcement repairs on some subsidence damaged properties. We hope to finish that webinar a couple of minutes early to allow Ron to deliver a closing statement for the year. So that's how we see things mapping out over the next few weeks, with the Subsidence Forum member companies demonstrating their skills and hopefully imparting some of their experience and knowledge onto the delegates. I hope you enjoy the events, and I hope you learn something new. So I'll now pass over to Sarah to start our first demonstration of the year, the mock-up of a tree root case. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Patrick, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Subsidence Forum's mock trial. This is a pre-recorded snippet of a trial, so you'll hear me shortly introducing the trial and the factual backgrounds, but I feel like I've been introduced. So I'm Sarah Dodd, the Vice Chair here at the Subsidence Forum. I'm also a partner at DAC Beechcroft and have been dealing with true subsidence claims for, I think 18 years or so now, so quite a while. In the video, you'll see me joined by 2 of my colleagues, David Thomas, a barrister at 2 Temple Gardens, and Kieran Hart, an expert arboriculturalist of Tamler trees. It's absolutely impossible to show a whole trial in half an hour, so we've chosen what we hope is an interesting snippet, but it means it gives you all the chance to be the judge at the end. So we're going to vote on what we think at the end the outcome of the trial should be. So your chance to set the law there. So a bit of interaction at the end. So if I can hand over to the video so you can all enjoy the pre-recorded trial. So sit back and enjoy. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Subsidence Forum's mock trial. This trial today is going to be half an hour long, so it's not going to be possible to show you the whole thing, of course. So we've chosen to show you a snippet, which will be the cross-examination by the defendant's counsel of the claimant's expert arboriculturalist. You'll see that the 3 of us are meeting on Zoom. We can't do this mock trial together face-to-face because of the coronavirus, but this very much reflects what's happening at the court at the moment, because trials and hearings are going ahead on Zoom. So by this point in the trial, everybody will know the factual background of the case, because the barristers will have given their opening submissions to the judge, and the lay witnesses, the claimant and the defendant's witnesses, will have already given their evidence in the witness box. So to catch you all up on the factual background, it's based on a case, but not, I'm not going to call it that case. You're going to use a little bit of artistic license. So here we go. So the claimant is the freehold owner of a 4-storey Victorian villa. It's one of 300 properties on a street which is lined by 276 significantly sized plane trees. Those plane trees are owned by and are the responsibility of the local authority. About 10 years prior to the claimant's property suffering damage, two of the properties on the other end of the street also suffered damage as a result of one of the plane trees. The local authority were told about the claim, but there wasn't a legal claim pursued against the local authority. Before the damage occurred, the local authority's tree policy shows that they own 9,900 trees across the borough, most of which are small ornamental trees. So this street of significantly sized plane trees is a real one-off for the borough. The property is built on a clay soil. The clay does vary across the borough. So there's low plasticity areas and high plasticity areas, and this is really on the boundary of the two. So there are two plane trees here that are affecting the property, both of which are 7 meters away. We've got one to the front left, which is 7 meters away and 10 meters tall, and one to the front right, 7 meters away, but 15 meters tall. There are a few other things involved in terms of causation. There's a plane tree in a neighbour's garden. There's also some significantly sized vegetation in the insured's front, in the claimant's front and back garden. There's also a history of a leak from the combined foul and storm drainage system. And also the property is built over a railway tunnel. The claim that was pursued by the claimant was one for damages, prior to notification to the council, and also an injunction. The injunction is a request to the court to order that trees be removed. However, on a without prejudice basis, prior to the start of the trial, the council removed both plane trees. That means then the trial starts, and it is for pursuing the recovery of monetary damages. So in terms of where we are here, Kieran Hart, the expert of arboriculturist for the claimant, has prepared a report. At this point, in terms of disclaimers, I must say that none of us, whilst we've got us a mock trial bundle, none of us here have got access to the actual site investigations. I think I can share my screen and show you the street on which the property is located, to give you an idea of the sort of street that we're dealing with. So a significant street with the Victorian villas and the plane trees. So at this point, I'm going to become the judge, which is quite novel. And I am going to take a bit of a role, almost like probably the clerk of the court would do this, but I don't mind doing this. So Kieran, if I can just swear you in to give your witness evidence. So I believe that you're going to take an affirmation rather than swearing on a holy text. So if you hold up your right hand, and can you solemnly affirm that the evidence that you will give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Hart, can you please state your name and professional address?
My name is Kieran Hart, and the professional address is Tamler Trees Limited, Fleet, Hampshire.
Thank you. Mr. Hart, I've read your report in the bundle, and are you happy with what is in the contents of your report?
I am.
Thank you. On the basis that there's no evidence in chief, Mr. Thomas, this is your witness.
Thank you, my lord. Good afternoon, Mr. Hart.
Good afternoon.
This afternoon, I'd like to talk with you about the road in question, Acacia Avenue. I see from your report that you visited Acacia Avenue as part of compiling your expert report.
That is correct.
One of the striking things about Acacia Avenue, especially as an arboriculturalist, must have been the plane trees that line either side of the road.
Indeed.
They are a very distinctive feature of the road, aren't they?
They are.
And particularly in the summer months, they must provide a canopy of green over the road.
They will.
As you can see from the pictures that are in your report, this road has a very distinctive look with Victorian villas and London plane trees planted in a relatively regular manner up and down the road, don't they?
They are.
And would you agree that the plane trees in question are obviously high amenity trees?
I would.
And notwithstanding any issue of subsidence, do you not agree that there must be an obvious and significant aesthetic benefit to retaining the trees as you see them in the photograph?
I would.
Now, if we can just turn to your report, and at page 8 of your report, on the second paragraph down where you say recommendations.
Yes.
The suggestion that you make in the capacity of expert witness is that the trees outside the claimant's property should have been pollarded, and that would have likely prevented the damage from occurring. Could you describe to the court what is entailed by pollarding a plane tree?
In this instance, the trees have historically been pollarded, and that work has lapsed and the canopies have regrown. And my assessment is such that they could be potentially repollarded, which would be to remove all of the leaf area to an established pruning point high in the canopy of the tree, at which it could be then repeat pruned in a cyclical manner.
And when you say removing, I think it was all of the leaf area, is that a removal of all of the crown of the tree?
Well, the main architectural branches remain, but in pollarding as a form of management, 100% of the leaf area is generally removed.
And when you say it just in layman's terms for the benefit of the judge, does that mean that once pollarded, these trees would have no leaves on them?
At the point of pollarding, but as a species, they would be very quick regrowth.
Mr. Thomas, may I interject there?
Of course, my lord.
Could I ask Mr. Hart, if you're talking about pollarding to that extent, would that impact upon the health of the tree significantly?
The wounds that were created have the potential to decay, yes, but pollarding management is quite common for London planes, and as a species, they are tolerant to that extent of pruning.
Mr. Hart, if I can just pick you up before we go back to my line of questioning. My lord was interested in any risk of health risk to the tree, and so you say that the pollarding would create wounds on the tree.
Correct, at the point of pruning, but it's also worth noting that these trees have historically been managed as pollards. So those wounds have historically been created in the past, and actually to repollard the trees would be to reduce the lever arm on previous wounds as well. So not only would you be potentially introducing wounds, you would be alleviating potential stress on existing previous historical pruning wounds.
So in your evidence, do you say that pollarding would increase the risk of disease to these trees?
Potentially it would, but that risk is minimal, and it's quite, it's quite a normal form of management for this species of tree in London.
If we can just move back to the effect that pollarding would have the look on these trees. When the trees are, what time during the year would they normally be pollarded?
Unfortunately, the way that they're managed, there's no hard and fast time that all the trees are pruned, because most local authorities are pruning a high number of trees in a cyclical manner. But there's no reason to prune all the trees at exactly the same time. You could prune intermittently along the road so that some retained their canopy and some didn't. But generally, let's say for argument's sake, the trees ideally would be pruned in the autumn before the spring. There's only really a bad time to prune trees, and that's as they are coming into leaf.
I'm grateful. As well as as well as pollarding the trees and the nature of pollarding the trees, how often would the trees need to be pollarded in order to have an effect on the water uptake of the trees?
Well, clearly managing trees by pruning is an inexact science in terms of their water management, but the research project of Hotlink 212 suggested that the work should be repeated every 2 years.
Do you accept, therefore, that if one was to pollard these trees every 2 years, it would have a significant effect on the visual amenity of the trees for a substantial period during that 2-year cycle?
Well, I mean, much of that is subjective to your view of significant, but undoubtedly the trees would appear to be pruned, and given that they were only growing back for 2 growing seasons, they would be being managed in a reduced size.
And in that reduced size, would the canopy effect that we saw in the photograph, would that exist?
It would be different, certainly.
In what way different?
Well, the image that we were showing earlier showed, rather cathedral-like branches ascending over the road. The trees would, be unlikely to attain that size of canopy again in 2 years. So you wouldn't have that kind of closed canopy cover over Acacia Avenue.
You mentioned a few seconds ago the Hotlink 212, and you've referred to that in your report, Mr. Hart. As I understand it, Hotlink 212, or the Horticulture Link Project from 2002, was a major study into how one could control water use of trees to alleviate subsidence risk.
To alleviate their water uptake, yes.
And in your opinion, does it remain the leading study in the United Kingdom in that area?
Yes.
If I could just take you within the bundle to the first couple of pages of Hotlink 212. And in particular to the executive summary of that document at pages 12 and 13. One of the points made in the Hotlink research project in the executive summary is that attempts to develop methods of successful and that the Arboricultural Association method of subsidence risk assessment was withdrawn, and that Royal and Sun Alliance made some efforts, which were recent to 2002, to develop a statistically based model to develop methods of subsidence risk assessment. Is it correct that it is still, there is no way of statistically modelling which trees will cause damage when and to which property?
Correct.
And perhaps in more layman's terms, that we cannot know in advance which tree will cause damage to which property in which year.
Correct.
And as I understand it, this is dependent upon where roots choose to develop, which is underground and unseen.
As in amongst other factors such as weather, soil type, foundation depth, etc.
Am I right, therefore, to say that one cannot actually put a percentage risk on an individual tree causing damage to a particular property in a particular year?
It would be correct to say that you can't put a percentage risk on that damage, but there are factors that obviously would feed into elevated risk relative to another tree against another property.
But if a body such as the local authority, my client, the local authority, can't work out percentage risks one against another, how on earth is it to go about deciding when to perform significant tree works as the ones that you suggest?
Yeah. Ultimately, that would be a decision for them, but I would suggest that various risk factors can be assessed. For example, we know which species of tree will be implicated in subsidence damage more often than others. We know at what distances, 75% of the time, those trees will be. We can assess from underlying, from available soil or even site investigations what the shrinkability of that clay soil may be. And we can make an assessment on the age of the property and potentially its risk of subsidence based on likely foundation depths.
Would one way, and a sensible way for a body such as my client to proceed, is that they should only take works as significant as pollarding following notification in an immediate area?
Ultimately, that would be a decision for them. I mean, that, you know, the local authority in question may have only one street in the borough that is of a high risk, so they may choose to allocate funds to proactively remove that risk by way of pollarding or selective tree removal. Or alternatively, they may choose to do nothing and pay out when the claim comes their way.
If we have a look at Acacia Avenue then, what we have here is an avenue, and we've seen from the photograph, with relatively uniform housing and trees. There are 300 properties on Acacia Avenue, aren't there?
Yes.
And in your report, you've helpfully conducted a survey which shows that there were 276 plane trees on the pavements outside the properties on Acacia Avenue.
Correct.
You can also see from your report that the properties on Acacia Avenue have similar length front gardens, and then the pavements and the local authority trees planted on those pavements are at a similar distance from the front wall of those front gardens. So in effect, all of the trees are about 7 meters or so from the front foundations of the properties on Acacia Avenue. That's correct, isn't it?
In the round, yes, I would agree with that.
If therefore, from the Halt-Link study, my client had no way of knowing which particular trees on Acacia Avenue was going to cause damage, am I right in thinking that the only sensible way of proceeding, you would say, is that all the trees on Acacia Avenue should have been, all of the plane trees on Acacia Avenue should have been pollarded?
Well, ultimately, if their objective was to minimise and manage their risk of exposure to subsidence from these trees being caused to the adjacent buildings, then yes, but I appreciate that there are other objectives in play with local authorities managing their trees.
And those objectives would include, say, maintaining the amenity value of trees.
Correct. And ensuring they're healthy and stable.
And also, local authorities' budgets are not infinite. And if you could just help me out with some of the figures you provide in your report at page 22, where you talk about the cost of the remedial measures you suggest.
Yes.
Now, what do you say would be the cost of pollarding one individual plane tree, to the best of your knowledge?
I'm advised that the schedule of rates cost in this instance is £400.
£400. So that would necessarily be 276 times £400 to pollard the entire road of trees.
Correct.
So I think on my maths, I might be wrong. A barrister doing calculations quickly in court isn't always the best, but the cost of that would be £110,400.
That is that tallies with my assessment.
And And as you said, that would be work that would need to be carried out every other year.
Indeed.
So, for example, you would be looking at rough and ready over £500,000 per decade of local authority funding to pollard these trees.
You would, which should be considered in the context of the claim before us.
But another way to look at that is, you are also aware that there are plane trees in the front garden of a neighbouring property in this instance.
There is.
And I assume that there were other plane trees and other vegetation in other gardens up and down Acacia Avenue.
There was other vegetation. I didn't make a direct assessment of the number of plane trees within the relevant front gardens.
But the plane tree in the front garden was about the same distance to the property as the local authority's plane trees, wasn't it?
Albeit at a smaller size, but yes.
Now, the local authority has no control over private planting, does it?
They don't.
And it is your case that plane tree was another contributing factor to the damage, and indeed you've achieved a settlement with the owner of the next door property. But doesn't that mean that the local authority could have pollarded all of its trees with the loss of amenity and the cost that incurs, but there would still be a real risk of subsidence from other properties along the avenue?
There would. I mean, there would remain that risk, but not all properties have a mature plane tree in the front garden in the adjacent property. So their management option of pruning all the trees would have potentially delivered a reduced risk to many more properties.
But in the case of your client, and in this case, it might well have been the case that all of this money, all of this pollarding work could have taken place, but yet subsidence requiring some repairs or underpinning would have been necessary in any event.
Potentially, but the London Tree Officers Association risk limitation strategy advocates repeat pruning of trees in exactly this manner to manage exactly these risks.
Mr. Hart, I see what you say in your report, but I must put my client's case to you, which is that given the costs of pollarding and the loss of amenity caused by pollarding, and one can imagine the outcry that there might have been, and the potential for subsidence still to have occurred, don't you agree that it was still within the range of things that a reasonable landowner, such as the local authority, could have done to leave these plane trees as they were and take that and balance it on that basis?
Well, it's not my position that the council dismissed action to this tree on the basis that there was a tree in the neighbouring garden. I think it's more likely that the real risk in terms of the factors of species involved, proximity, 75% claims distance, etc., had probably not been proactively considered. And also within this borough, as we heard at the beginning, as is established, there are very few streets with mature tree-lined, streets of this type. So the real implications to the local authority in a proactive risk management is probably less than in a borough where there are many such streets.
Thank you. I have no further questions for you, Mr. Hart.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, that is the end of the snippet of the mock trial. One thing that you'll probably get a flavour of in terms of watching that video is how slow-paced a trial can actually be. I think we're guilty of seeing trials on TV and in films, and you think it'll be fast-paced and people standing up shouting objection and all being very exciting, but actually on the ground it's very slow moving, and the pace is pretty, it can be pretty laboured. So it's not the sort of exciting thing that we all think it's going to be, but let's hope we manage to avoid trials anyway. Anyway, let's all take the chance to become mini judges ourselves and get ready to do some interaction and vote. So we're going to launch a poll to ask you, there's going to be 3 questions in this poll, so I'm going to vote as well. So the first one then, do you think that the risk of damage was foreseeable to the council in this case? So vote now, yes or no. What's the outcome? Yes. Oh, big majority for yes. 79% of people thought yes, the risk of damage was foreseeable to the council, and then 21% thinking no. Great, well done, judges. Next question. Do you think that the council removing the 2 plane trees before the trial put them in a weaker position? So, on a without prejudice basis before the trial, the council took the trees down. Do you think that changed their position? Vote now. I should have loaded up my countdown music so I could have played it while you're all thinking to vote. So again, yes, 72% of people think yes, the council removing the 2 plane trees before the trial did put them into a weaker position. Great. And final one. Who do you think should win the trial? The crux, the killer question. So the claimant should win, be awarded damages, or the defendant should win and defend the claim in full. Pin your colours to the mast. If only it was this straightforward, we should just have judges clicking on a poll in the courtroom. So 69% think the claimant should win and be awarded damages, and 31% think the defendant should win. I wonder if that's a reflection of what side of the fence people who are in attendance at this webinar are on. I wonder if that's a reflection of that percentage. If only I could quickly work that out. Great, thank you. I hope you enjoyed being mini judges today. It's probably the closest that any of us will get to being judges, so I hope you enjoyed that for a Friday morning. We are now going to take some questions, I think, Lauren, from the chat box. I've seen a couple that have come through. I've answered a couple, I think, on the go with the help of Google here on the screen next to me.
What would we do without Google, eh?
I know.
Yeah, we've had some really good comments, as Sarah said. Obviously, we've been monitoring throughout. Sarah, I know that you've gone back to a few, so I'll just read some of them out that we've had. Patrick, I think this one touched on something that you said in your introduction. Someone had a question. It said 60%. This has gone down from the usual claim of in excess of 80% of subsidence attributed to trees in the past. Are you able to answer that, Patrick?
Yes, I can. The percentage split between the different claim types does vary from year to year depending on the weather. But overall, our data shows that if you take a big enough set of years, that it's about 60% of valid claims relate to clay shrinkage subsidence. That is just valid claims, so you've got to consider that a lot of claims that are received in the first place are not subsidence, so they're taken out of the equation. And of the valid ones, the statistics show it's about 80% clay shrinkage, 18 to 20% due to leaking drains or escape of water, burst water mains. Another 16% probably due to poor ground, infill sites, peat, that sort of thing. And 6% the rest, heave, landslip, sinkholes, that sort of thing. Now, when you get a hot summer, such as we experienced in 2018, the percentage of clay shrinkage cases will go up and the repudiation rate will go down. So in 2018, I think the percentage of clay shrinkage cases was about 75 to 80%. So it does vary year by year, but overall 60% is a fair average, I think.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I hope that answered your question, the one that was submitted. Okay, so there are some questions on the chat relating to the case. So the first one, guys, if you can join me, is if the reduction of risk is the responsibility of the LA, is it not also the responsibility of the homeowner with respect to their own foundations?
I think I might take that one.
Thank you, David.
I think in terms of that, the essential test is, as landowners, who acted reasonably and who failed to act reasonably. The underlying legal test is as simple as that. The obligations placed on a homeowner are probably very limited when it comes to their foundations, and particularly if one has a Victorian property with shallow foundations, a court would be very slow to say that a homeowner should just go and pay for underpinning themselves. They probably won't do that. And I think it's more the case of what is it reasonable or not reasonable for the local authority to be doing. Bearing in mind, on the one hand, that probably in numerical terms, the local authority has a lot of money. But more recently, I think the courts are coming around to the idea that council budget, local authority budgets are a finite resource. And when you're looking at it, what's reasonable for a local authority to do, that has to be, the management of certain trees on a certain road has to be balanced against all that local authority's other priorities that it may have.
Okay, thank you, David, for that. And again, I hope that's answered the question put on the chat. Okay, the next one, is it similar in context to those councils in Australia that build properties in front of an amusement park, then the park had to be closed down due to noise? Just because the tree was there first, does it mean the property owner should have expected damage? Who would like this one?
That's another, David, that's another one.
Who are you, David?
I think in this case, and I've seen some of the comments on the chat, that this was a bit of a riff of the Barenton Islington case, although we did change some of the facts to, in some ways, make it more evenly balanced. But in Barenton Islington, the house was built in Victorian times, and although we perhaps don't know the date that the tree was planted, it either might have been planted the same time that the houses were built, but these were, in some ways, it was a tree in a house that had been there sort of historically. So it perhaps doesn't have that same feel as cases where a new development comes to existing trees, or people later on plant trees next to houses. I think the Australian building houses next to a fun fair, there is a general legal principle that if you come to the nuisance or you come to a state of affairs, so say there is a forest and a developer builds a development of houses right by an existing forest, the owner of that forest should be entitled to assume that the developer will have built, for example, in accordance with the NHBC building next to trees guidance, and therefore that they don't have to do any particular work to their forest because the houses came later. And the authority for that is Siddiqui in Hillingdon, London Borough Council. But on the margins, there can be claims when you move forward in time that, for example, somebody may build a conservatory on the back of their house next to a tree. initially the landowner may say, well, I can assume that conservatory had proper foundations. But unfortunately, the sting in the tail can be 30, 40 years later, when the manager of the wood or the tree doesn't perform pruning or management works, then the claimant who owns this conservatory or building that begins to crack, they may be able to bring a claim. But the underlying test is that of reasonableness between the pair of them.
Laurie,
Thank you, David.
can I pick out a question for us to answer from the chat box?
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a question raised in there, sorry, I can't remember who raised it, which was, is it not the court's decision, is it not the question for the court just to work out what the cause of the damage is? And why is everybody looking at, you know, what the council's regime should have been? So that's a really interesting point, and that's one that's often raised to me when I'm talking to people about tree subsidence cases. They say, well, the tree caused the damage, so, you know, case closed, not meaning to use a horrible term like that. But David, it's far more than that, isn't it? And we almost have to row back from that causation question to ask the preliminary question, which is really where the case law is focusing at the moment, which is on the local authority's duty of care and this question of foreseeability, which is the real buzzword here.
Yes, I think the real buzzword and the difficult cases are those where a claimant is alleging that the local authority should have just done more work prior to being put on notice of damage to their property. So in the mock case that we were looking at, in Berent itself, the allegation was that Islington should have, and in Berent it was that Islington should have simply removed these trees prior to being put on notice of a specific claim. And we've changed that slightly in our mock trial to say, well, actually Islington or whatever council it was should have pollarded the trees, part of their general management. So the balance for the court is, was the council reasonable in its in the tree management that it performed? So in this case, it would be, was it reasonable of this council to elect not to pollard in circumstances where you have London plains on clay soils next to properties that are likely to have shallow foundations? And the court will consider all of those matters when coming to a determination. But the courts are very much alive at the moment, as I say, to the pressures on councils and the loss of amenity of certain trees if you do pollard or remove them.
Thank you, David. So it all seemed to be for, for you. Sarah, are there any others that you specifically want to ask?
The question about whether the document Beyond Hortlink could be made available. Kieran, is Beyond Hortlink a publicly available document that we can share? Do you know? If you're there.
I am. I will have a look and check the copyright before answering that.
Oh, good idea. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we can look at that. And somebody else, Simon raised a question about, you know, and this is a question which I think is becoming more and more front and center in a situation in which obviously everybody wants to avoid trees being removed. You know, the environmental questions are higher and higher up on the agenda. So a question was raised about whether epoxy resin is a possibility for stabilisation of properties, which removes the need to remove the trees. I don't know much about epoxy resin, if anything. Kieran, do you know anything about that and alternative remedies?
At the risk of plugging one of the next seminars, are we not having a look at that in a future day?
Patrick's coming on. Go on, Patrick.
What I would comment in terms of that is that, you know, there are all sorts of solutions in terms of underpinning, potentially resins, root barriers, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, rightly or wrongly, the insurers who are basically acting on behalf of the claim, they want the cheapest option. Don't shoot the messenger. And it often is the cheapest option, unfortunately, and the one that offers the greatest guarantee of success is to remove the offending vegetation. It's as simple as that, unfortunately.
Yeah, can I just make a couple of points? First of all, Kieran, I wouldn't say that the insurers are after the cheapest option. They're after the most appropriate option that balances risk against cost. Regarding epoxy resin, that's normally a product used for crack repair works, not so much on the foundations, but as Kieran did mention, if you're interested, next week we have got a demonstration by GeoBear, who will be showing us how that they are using some resin injection techniques to stabilise clay soil. So I'd urge you to log on next week and have a look and pose the same question to the chaps from GeoBear.
One thing I think it's worth adding is that I see a number of comments in the chat function about the sort of implications of removing trees and, you know, the bigger picture in terms of climate, and I agree. But I think it's also important to remember that the sheer number of trees involved in these subsidence claims each year is very small. And I think, you know, obviously we don't want to lose any trees if we don't have to, but the reality of this is it's not a, you know, whole-scale desertification. The number of trees that can cause subsidence that go on to actually do it is very small in the bigger picture.
Kieran, can I ask you another question, picking out from the chat box? Someone mentioned about caveat value, and obviously something that runs through this, you know, this area of law is reasonableness and balancing. So what, do you have any comments that you want to make about caveat value and what the local authority would do about valuing?
I mean, my personal opinion is that, you know, I think it's great to put a monetary value on trees as an asset. But really, ultimately, these would go into the pot, in my opinion, in terms of the council making a cost-benefit analysis against what they're going to do. You know, there's no denying that the street that we just looked at there with the trees with full canopies, those trees are going to be of a higher financial value than similar trees which are being, you know, completely pollarded at 2-year intervals. And ultimately, the council, you know, if they want to make a decision based on what they do to the tree, you know, if the value of the tree financially outweighs the cost of the repair to the building, then ultimately it's a decision for them to make as to whether or not they pay out for the repair of the building and retain the tree. You know, our role is essentially to guide the court on what the options are and what the likely outcomes will be from those options.
Thank you. Sorry, Lauren, can I pick up another question which is coming in on the Q&As? And I just had a quick look at the Q&As. When we did the votes earlier, the question I put on, one of the questions I put on there was, do you think the fact that the council removed the 2 plane trees prior to the start of the trial would have put the council in a weaker position? And the vote was that yes, it would have put the council in the weaker position. And somebody's picked up on that and said, can we explain why taking that action to remove the trees prior to the trial would have put the council in a weaker position? But I think I need to clarify, I don't think it necessarily would have. David, if you, yeah, you're shaking your head as well. If you...
No, I didn't think it would have, and I think one important thing is there's a distinction between what is reasonable to do before you're put on notice of a particular claim from a particular property, and what it is reasonable to do after you are put on notice of a particular claim for a particular property. So if a particular homeowner has said that particular tree is causing my property damage, then it may well be the case that a local authority elects to remove or significantly prune or pollard a particular tree, while still being able to say, but before that, but before I was put on notice, it was reasonable of me not to do so. Moreover, I think in practical terms, the council is most probably likely to have removed the tree anyway, to have stymied any claim for underpinning and damages for underpinning. Because if the tree is removed, the damages claim would normally then simply be for the superstructure, plastering, making good works, rather than what I imagine would have been a very expensive underpinning scheme on a large Victorian property.
Thanks, David. I've seen one last question in the chat. I think we're probably coming up to 10 o'clock, so maybe one last question. I'm going to aim it at you, Kieran. The question is, should tree experts be concerned about what the courts or insurers or local authorities think?
I think if if you want to be, in inverted commas, an expert in the field, you kind of need to be casting your net wide about all the various perspectives as they come into the claim, and that should feed into your knowledge. And if you have a particular set in stone position and don't flex yourself to how things are changing and what the courts are acting like, then I think you might set yourself up for a fall.
I think we almost need to add somebody else in there as well and say not only is it the courts, insurers, local authorities, and the claimant themselves, but also the local people in the area. I think neighbours and people in the locality are going to be involved more and more in these cases, as local authorities perhaps have to consult with their local residents even when they want to take action with their own trees. So I think that's another entrant into the list of people we need to think about.
Thanks, guys. Obviously, as Sarah said, we are coming up to the hour now, so we will need to wrap things up. With regards to all the questions that have been asked on the Q&A section and in the chat, they will be answered offline to all attendees, so you will all see the answers to all of them. So we'll endeavour to get them out as soon as possible. Okay, I'll pass you over to Patrick now, who'll just do a wrap up of the session.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. Sarah, Kieran and David, thank you for all your time and effort that you put into that. I thought the video was excellent, entertaining, educational at the same time. I'm not sure what the virtual equivalent of a round of applause is, but it's due now, so very well done. It's got the training day or training webinars off to a fantastic start, so thank you very much for that. Just a final reminder for the next event, next Friday, same time, same place, 9 o'clock start. Don't forget to register and tell your friends and colleagues to do likewise. Hope to see you all again next week. Until then, stay safe. Thanks very much for joining.
Thanks, Patrick. Bye.